Happy New Year! Man, it was a fast and expensive holiday season. I hope you guys had a wonderful time giving gifts to one another. Even more so, I hope you guys actually have enough money to pay rent this month. I've decided I'm going to take a break from what you guys think is rage bait, even though it's actually my unfettered opinion, and just do a basic top 10 video about the best car movies ever. These are the only correct answers. If you disagree, then kiss my cheeks. I'm right, you're wrong. Also, little reminder, I have a Redbubble. I take pictures of cars and throw them up there on various prints, posters, and buttons if you want it. My photos are pretty good if I do say so myself. There's a link in the description down below, so if you want some Christmas gifts, then you can always start there. Okay, so before we get into the full video, let's lay some ground rules. Rule number 1. The movie has to have cars as the main part of the movie, meaning films that just have a cool car scene will not be counted. So, sorry, Bullet will not make the cut, since that's more of a detective-style film. Rule number 2, this will be a live action list only, as this makes it more fair in general so they don't have to fight with hardcore nostalgia. So unfortunately, Cars, Hot Wheels World Race, and Acceleracers will not be a part of this list. I'm gonna save it for another one though, mark my words. Now, this list is in order from least best to best best, so the early era movies listed, the lower it is on my preference scale. Alright, so now it is time to discredit myself right away. Talladega Nights. Now, in terms of movie quality, this movie needs no introduction. It's funny, it's memorable, and overall it's just a bunch of fun to watch. Now, some may say it's not completely about cars, but if you watch the movie again, you notice there's actually a decent amount of racing scenes in this film, and they're all put together pretty well. They're just more focused on the comedy aspect than the car aspect. The story is about a top-of-the-line race car driver who's put to shame by some Frenchman. He gets help from his original muse, his father, and he pulls himself out of his depression and gets back on that track a more humble man. The characters are funny and well acted, the action's there, and it is absolutely a fun movie to watch with your car buddies while passing a couple of beers. It is by no means the best on this list, but I needed to include it here somewhere, so it gets the bottom slot. Now, might tick some folks off that this next one is so close to the bottom of the list, but next up is American Graffiti. This movie is a classic coming-of-age story about teenagers realizing they're not going to be a core friend group forever and coming to terms with it. Also, a grown-ass man is stalking a high schooler to challenge him in a race, which is already pathetic to begin with, but then he loses. If you take a step back from the film, that part is completely psychotic. Some people might argue it's not enough of a car guy film because it's not very technical, but I think it's actually much more focused on basic automotive culture. You don't need to know how many gigasharts a car makes to go zoom, you just gotta hop into a cool car with your friends and cruise. I know it's set in the 60s, but I grew up in an area that still had a lot of that culture growing up, so it really resonated with me when I first watched it. Heck, it's set and filmed in an area only an hour drive from my childhood home, so it's even crazier seeing places I recognize up on that screen. It's a film that tackles a topic that everybody has to face at some point, and it does so gracefully with sick cars covering the screen. And I mean sick. The old Ford Coupe is iconic. I would love to have one day. Next up is Need for Speed, and finally I'm at a film where people might actually start agreeing with me. Now, Need for Speed is a 2014 film starring Aaron Paul, an ex-race car driver trying to make ends meet at his performance garage. He and his buddies street race to help make the extra cash they need to survive. The crew gets hired by a douche named Dino to build a Shelby Mustang that was left unfinished by Carroll himself. When it's done, a buyer wants to see how fast it is, so Aaron takes him for a ride, reaching 230 miles per hour. Dino is mad at Aaron for disobeying him, so he challenges him to a race for the cut of the money. Dino starts losing, so he kills Aaron's brother. Aaron gets blamed and imprisoned. Aaron gets out, wants revenge, so he does another race across the country, which takes up the bulk of the movie. Dino puts out a hit on him. Aaron tells him to suck nuts and wins. He challenges Dino to another race, this time gets him arrested for his brother's murder, and bing bang boom, that's how you zoom. Now, this movie obviously has a very busy plot, but it's still a lot of fun to watch. As usual, Aaron Paul puts on a phenomenal performance, and once you pair that with some phenomenal race sequences, you have an awesome film that's worth a few watches. Not to mention how cool the Mustang is in this film. I'm still waiting for a body kit to come out, even though it's been 11 years since this movie dropped. Critics weren't huge fans of it, feeling it took itself too seriously, and to an extent I agree, but I'll never understand the outright hate for it. Next up is the 2005 Dukes of Hazzard movie, specifically the unrated version. This movie, in terms of writing quality, is not that great. The plot is simple, the story is predictable, the humor is juvenile, and it really depends on the action scenes to carry the film. However, the best thing about it is that the plot is simple, the story is predictable, the humor is juvenile, and it really depends on the action scenes to carry the film. Look, in my opinion, a lot of movies nowadays are Oscar baiting. They try to be so serious and convoluted just to mop up at award shows, and it's very rare nowadays to see a film that's just fun for the sake of being fun. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't grow up watching the original series, and I didn't even see this film until I was in college back in 2019, so I had the privilege of seeing this film in a vacuum with absolutely zero expectations in a world already filled with Oscar bait films, and I had an amazing time with it. In case you couldn't tell by watching this channel, I have a very juvenile sense of humor, so most of the jokes landed with me, and because I was a teenage car guy myself at the time, how Bo treated his car really resonated with me.
I'm never gonna get out of this car again. I'm gonna live in it, I'm gonna eat it, and I'm gonna make sweet love to it.
You mean you're gonna make sweet love in it?
Oh no, I wanna fuck it.
The plot is pretty simple. The good old boys are delivering moonshine, and Boss Hogg,
Holy shit! Burt Reynolds!
is twisting the law to own their land and a ton of other land in Hazard County to turn into a mining town. Bo and Luke obviously got to put a stop to that and win a race at the same time against a professional race car driver who is also in Hogg's pocket. One of the things I really love about this film is that it adjusts the concepts for a modern audience while still respecting the source material, a very difficult balance for remakes and adaptations to strike. These adjustments can be summed up in one scene, addressing the elephant in the room of having the Confederate flag on top of the car. It's a very controversial flag. Personally, I don't agree with, but the movie handles it beautifully. See, in the movie, the flag wasn't originally on top of the car. It didn't get put there until the car was put together by Cooter, played by the hilarious David Koechner. Without asking the boys' permission, he and his mechanic friends throw it up on top. It's not noticed until the Duke boys are in Atlanta stuck in traffic, and they're called out for being racist by other drivers and praised by some redneck in a semi saying the South will rise again. The Duke boys are obviously confused until they look on top of the car and realize the flag is there. Instead of taking a stance on the topic, they very truthfully comment on how it might lead to issues in the city. Now, this is genius because it allows the Dukes to avoid alienating audiences on the West Coast that hate that flag, while still allowing fans of the original series to see their beloved car untouched on screen just by shifting the blame to a minor character. With this, you don't have any vendetta against Bo and Luke. It's all against the mechanic. And obviously, I need to talk about just how incredible the stunt work is in this movie. Every driving scene is intense and entertaining, and in my opinion, the police chase in Atlanta is one of the best chase scenes I've ever seen, capped off by an amazing jump at the end. Story's wrapped up in a little bow, and you're left with a fun experience. Number 5, we got Smokey and the Bandit. Now, this movie is the epitome of dumb fun. Easy to follow story, lovable characters played by Burt Reynolds and Sally Field, who I gotta say is aging like fine wine, and a sick car doing some sick stunts. It was the 70s, what more could you want? What sets this apart from the Dukes is mostly just due to the quality of the story. Smokey and the Bandit is just tighter overall, while Dukes has just a teensy bit of fluff that could be cut. Smokey and the Bandit is a classic for many reasons, but most of all, it's the ultimate father-son movie, which is how I imagine most people, myself included, first saw this film. This is mostly due to the PG rating, meaning it won't scare away or traumatize a young child like some of these other films. Looking at you, Need for Speed. Its humor is very snappy and well written, and the action is awesome. It's fairly similar to Dukes of Hazzard, with big jumps, crazy crashes, and anything else that'll make you point at the screen in a weird mixture of wow, that's so cool, and wow, that's bullshit. As usual, you have Burt Reynolds being cool as a catfish like he is in all of his roles, and once you mix that with the goofball Jerry Reed and the snappy Sally Field, you got a hit that'll be passed down for generations. And I mean it. My dad watched this with his dad, and then I watched it with mine, and when I have a son or a daughter, they will be seeing this movie with me. Alright, we're officially now in the second half of the video, so we're going to do some quick honorable mentions. Now the first one is the Fast and the Furious series. Now, obviously this had to be on the list somewhere, but the quality is just not very good in general. And yes, I'm including the original movies with that. Let's not act like those are crazy tight stories. However, I will say they're phenomenal movies to just go and turn your brain off to. You don't need a story, you just need to see cars flying through the air. It's the movie equivalent of McDonald's. Next honorable mention is Gran Turismo. I know a lot of people like this movie, but it's just pretty corny in general in my opinion. I get that it's a true story, but I just couldn't get myself to like the main character. It seems to me he was a lazy bum that played his little racing video game claiming he was going to be a pro racer one day while he mooched off his parents. The only reason he got a shot was because he got lucky they happened to put on that Gran Turismo tournament. If they hadn't, he'd still be a bum in his dad's house claiming he was going to be great one day without ever actually at least buying a box and taking this to the local track. The film's action is okay, and the story overall is fine, but I just couldn't get past that. No disrespect to the real guy, I'm sure that's just how the movie portrayed him, but the character was very irritating. Last honorable mention is the Love Bug series. Now, I haven't seen this series in a long time, but I do remember absolutely loving it as a kid. Herbie is just the best. The original car with a personality, throwing it down with cars 10 times better than him and leaving them in the dust. I even enjoy Herbie Fully Loaded with Lindsay Lohan. Overall, it's a great series to watch with the family, full of quirky, funny dialogue, a lot of action, and heroes you can root for. Alright, second half of the list, here we go. In 5th place, we got the 2008 Speed Racer film. Now, The adults hated this film when it came out, but since I was a child, I loved it and I still love it to this day. The visuals are truly something to behold, as this movie has more color than any other film in the last 20 years. Filmed by the Wachowskis, there are a ton of cartoon and anime-inspired techniques. The transitions are super creative, the characters are bright and fun, and the action is like nothing you've ever seen. And I mean like nothing you've ever seen. These are rocket-powered cars from an anime, driven by cheesy villains straight out of a Silver Era comic book, fought by an 18-year-old race car driver that's a black belt in karate. Somebody saw this pitch and said, yeah, let's give it a budget of $120 million. Beyond the insane visuals, the movie has a lot of heart, focusing heavily on Speed's relationship with his family, how they dealt with the death of his brother Rex, and how they may fight, but they've always got each other's backs. Plus, you got John Goodman as Pop's Racer. I literally cannot imagine a better casting choice than him. Number 4 spot goes to Baby Driver. This film easily has one of the best stories on this list. A young man who is thrown into the crime world is a driver for this crime organizer Kingpin guy. Kid tries to get out, Kingpin doesn't let him leave, next job goes bad, kid runs away with a crazy chase sequence. The cast is phenomenal, even though the two leads ended up being horrible human beings in the real world. Spacey and Elgort have an amazing back and forth, Lily James is realistically endearing, Ham and Fox are amazing villains, Isa Gonzalez makes me extremely uncomfortable, and this film is just the best everywhere. The stunt work is incredible too, with some of the most amazing driving sequences I've ever seen in my life. Everybody knows the initial bank robbery chase right at the beginning of the movie. Not only does this sequence have amazing balls-to-the-wall action, but it characterizes the main character beautifully. We haven't even begun to talk about how the music is injected directly into the veins of this film, having everything sync to it, giving it a very stylistic snap. Combine that with a very tight and endearing story with some hilarious moments thrown in, and you have a classic film on your hands. Go watch it. Now. And now we're at the top 3. Everything up to this point has been good, but these ones are all in their own ballpark. These films are truly great. Let's get into it. Number 3 goes to Rush, the story of F1 driver Niki Lauda and his rival/eventual friend James Hunt. This film is heavy. With an R rating, Rush takes a look at the grim reality of being a race car driver in the 1970s, showing it's not just glory and fun. You're actually risking your life at breathtaking speeds. People die. People get hurt. Not everybody in this world is a stand-up person. It lays down this idea all while having some of the most heart-throbbing racing scenes ever. I can't even begin to describe how horrifically Niki Lauda's famous crash is depicted. On top of this, the characters are genuinely interesting and seem very realistically written. I don't know the true backstory, I've never been super into F1, but everything seems pretty feasible. The acting is phenomenal, as the two leads are played by people that are now household names. We have Chris Hemsworth, who's frickin' Thor, and Daniel Bruhl, who you might recognize as Zemo from Civil War. They're absolutely masters of their craft, and they bring the whole film to life. I don't want to completely spoil this film for you because it's so good, so just take my word for it. Go watch it. Number 2 on this list may surprise a lot of you, but this spot goes to The Art of Racing in the Rain. You ever seen A Dog's Purpose, where it's a story told through the dog's eyes? Well, take that, keep it one dog and one owner, add some race cars and some family drama, and you've got this film. Some spoilers come after this. If you're thinking of seeing this film, pause the video now. The Art of Racing in the Rain is about a race car driver named Danny who feels his career is stagnating. He constantly pushes himself to do more races, often at the expense of his time with his family. However, when his wife passes away, he is forced to strike a balance or lose his child, and he eventually finds out what really matters and how to do both while also finding his dream job. Despite the quirkiness of the entire story being told through the eyes of the dog in the film, it actually plays it very straight and overall comes off as endearing. I will never understand why critics tore this movie apart. Me and my dad watched this together. I was probably around like 20. This movie had 2 grown-ass men blubbering in tears. I'm not kidding around. This movie's a tearjerker that's masterfully acted. Yeah, it doesn't have the tightest story in the world, but it more than makes up for it in heart, and you absolutely need to watch this film. It's proof that you can get away with some writing as long as people are invested. Now, before we get to number 1, I'm gonna add a car racing movie that I absolutely hate. The 2023 Ferrari movie. I know this got some semi-decent reviews, but don't be fooled, this movie's a drag. Hey, let's make a movie about the biggest face of racing the world has ever seen. Also, let's push all the racing to the side and instead focus on the fact that he's cheating on his wife. I'm sure that's what the audiences came to see. The acting is also pretty bad, even though it has some of the best actors of this generation. Adam Driver, Penelope Cruz, Patrick Dempsey, Hugh Jackman. I know you guys can act, it's gotta be because of the directing. This is mostly exemplified in a scene right at the beginning. There's a driver at a test track, he crashes and is flung out of his car and of course dies. Enzo Ferrari looks at this, basically goes, that's unfortunate, and off. I looked it up, and apparently this is one of his best friends and the main driving force of the film. I had to look it up to understand that, and on top of that, the film has a very bleak ending that doesn't really feel like anything got accomplished. Now, I understand and I'm okay with having a bleak ending, especially in a realistic film. The number one on this list is proof of that. What I don't enjoy is a film that's basically, hey, let's make a movie about a rough patch in this dude's life. Nothing gets done, and he's the same person at the end as he was in the beginning. I really hate that movie. All right, and now we're in the top spot. Number one on this list obviously goes to none other than Ford versus Ferrari. Now, this film is a masterpiece. The story, amazing. The score, perfect. The action, amazing. The acting, phenomenal. There's absolutely nothing I would change to this film. Ford versus Ferrari is an absolute masterclass of a movie. The story follows Ken Miles. He's kind of out of his luck when it comes to driving professionally, mostly sticking to the local leagues. The IRS took his garage, his wife's had to pick up extra shift to cover his butt. Things are not looking great. But when his old friend Carroll Shelby comes to have him test a car and work for Ford to kick Ferrari's butt at Le Mans, he takes the job, makes some bank in the process, all while finally doing what he was meant to do. Obviously, the story is a tad more complicated than that, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it short. What really makes this movie stand out from others is the fact that even though it's a real story that happened, the movie knows when to stretch the truth, just enough to make things entertaining. Yeah, and this leads to a controversial opinion of mine. If you're making a movie that's meant to entertain, you don't need to make it 100% realistic. You need to make it real to the characters so that they react how they would in real life to it, but it's okay to stretch things just a little bit, and this movie is proof of that. For example, Ford never cried, Shelby never held up the 7,000 RPM sign, and oh yeah, Ken actually raced in Le Mans twice and only won the second time. Granted, that was due to an equipment failure, so not exactly his fault, but for those reasons, I would say this isn't a historical film, but historical fiction, but regardless, it is absolutely phenomenal. Also, notice that in most of these other films, I refer to the characters as the actors' names, not the characters. Not for Ford versus Ferrari. Matt Damon and Christian Bale disappear into their roles so well that most of the time I'm watching the film, I forget these aren't the actual guys, they're just characters. The characters all feel very real, and I imagine that some of this has to do with the fact that the actors had an inside view of the dynamics of the characters. As Peter Miles, Ken Miles' son, came aboard to help with ensuring everybody was realistically portrayed. The soundtrack is also iconic. Even today, if I'm going for a cruise, I'll put it on. It just oozes with the intensity that comes with pushing a car to the limit. If you want to listen to it, I recommend listening to the track Le Mans 66. It's the most iconic one of the film. And finally, let's touch on the action. This movie looks and feels incredible. The camera angles put you right into the action with a lot of low angles to make the car seem bigger than life. In a theater, you feel like you're right there. There's just nothing to compare it to. You need to watch this film. And that wraps up this list. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know I enjoyed watching all these films, and I hope you do too. Little reminder, I have that Redbubble, so go check it out. I hope you guys have a great day. Peace.